He's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 25 years of experience.
And he's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief. And together, we're the Brief Brothers, having an ongoing conversation about briefs, briefing, and advertising. So, Howard, we're back and we're rapidly approaching the new year. And it's only appropriate that we have some New Year's resolutions. In this case, resolutions for brief writers. And let's see if we can improve brief writing in the upcoming year in 2022. So, is there anything first you want to talk about regarding better briefs?
Well, how about we say congratulations that we've made it almost a full year, Henry. Brief Brothers to the end of December, and we're still here. So pat ourselves on the back. We'll have a special episode, I think, second or third week in January, which is the official 1 year mark. But you know, we've been keeping this thing going for almost a full year. So congratulations. I think the thing that I want to emphasize is kind of old school, and you've heard it many, many times, but you can't hear it enough. If you really want to get good at writing a creative brief, the thing that you have to focus on more than anything else is practice. And I remember I used to tell a joke in my workshops. I'd stop and I'd say, okay, folks, how many of you write a practice creative brief when you don't have to? And I get a look like I just landed from Mars, right? It's like, they basically say, we have barely enough time to write the briefs we're supposed to write. And now you're asking me, do I practice writing a brief? Yeah, but you need to. And I say the recommendation I give you is not sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and write a brief. You can do it in your head. And we've talked about this many, many times over the course of our episodes, where you do these reverse engineering exercises. You can do that in your head. When we come home from work, let's not turn off our brain for at least 3 minutes. And if we see a TV spot or flip through a magazine or going through our Instagram account, and we come across an ad, let's stay as our professional marketer or advertising person and think about that communication as if we had written the brief for it or would be writing the brief for it. That's how you practice. You've got to keep your mind fresh. Now, I'm reminded of a story that Gary Player told when he was invited up into the booth to comment on a tournament. For those of you who don't know,
golfer, yeah,
a golfer. Gary Player is 86 years old. He's one of the giants, the legends of the PGA Tour. Doesn't compete anymore except in these off tournaments. He told a story about practicing that I love. He was chipping at a practice green, and every chip he hit went into the hole, and there was a fan 20 feet away watching him, because at tournaments you can watch the pros practice. And every time Gary chipped the ball and it went in the hole, the fan just said, oh, that's just luck. He would do this over and over again, 2, 3, 4 shots in a row. He'd chip right into the hole, and the fan would just say, oh, that's just luck. Well, Gary could hear him, and he got a little pissed off. And after the last shot, he hit into the hole, and the guy said, oh, that's just luck. Gary turned and said, the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yep.
And that's really the point. You've got to practice. Yep. What kind of advice would you have, Henry?
I agree. I think that practice is great, and I think, to me, there's 2 parts of the brief that you can really benefit from practicing. And I would recommend, like, open up a Word document and try to do it. And one is the target description. Like, think about the audience. What do they feel? What do they like? Who are they? What keeps them up at night? In general, and then specific to the product or industry that we're advertising or that you're doing your exercise about. And then the other is the single-minded proposition. I think you need to have, muscle memory in writing those pithy, headliney, single-minded propositions that have loaded language in them that are inspiring. In terms of a resolution or advice for better brief writing in 2022, I think not directly related to brief writing, but I would recommend Why Does the Peddler Sing by Paul Feldwick to any brief writer. And the reason is because it's going to make you think differently about advertising. And and when you think differently about advertising, by necessity, it's going to change how you think about your creative brief and what you're trying to get out, and evaluating the creative that is generated by the creative brief. So that's what I would say.
I would add to that what I love about Paul's book, and he has also written another book called The Humbug of Advertising. Is that
It's
right? The
The
anatomy
Anatomy of
of
Humbug.
humbug, right? Is that he does a great job of filling in a lot of blanks that most of us in the business have about our own history. He tells what was the first philosophy of advertising and what came after that and what came after that. So we get a sequence and a chronology of what the thinking was. That's valuable. I can't tell you how many times I've done training with people and they just simply have no sense of our own history. That's
Yeah.
critical.
Yeah, I think that's true of most people in most industries. It's especially egregious in our industry. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and I say, or we would if we knew who they were, because a lot of people don't know who they are. I think
Right.
you wanted to mention the Better Briefs project, since we're talking about resolutions for the new year and writing better briefs. Is there anything you want
Yes.
to say on that?
Yeah, well, I want to give another shout out to Matt Davies and Peter Paul von Wheeler, who are the idea generators and the founders of this concept called the Better Briefs Project. And they have a website called betterbriefs.com. And here you can go and learn about what their survey uncovered about what we pretty much already know about the status of marketing briefs. They shared with us some pretty frightening information about the poor quality of briefs, and I'm talking about marketing briefs now, from the client to the agency. And that's provided a huge spark, I think, for them and for you and me to do more preaching and teaching about how to write a great brief. If I have one little criticism of their work, it's that their sample was pretty small. In fact, it was probably too small to draw such huge conclusions. But I would say, you know what? I think we've known for such a long time the poor status and the poor quality of brief writing that even with such a small sample, I think the conclusions are spot on.
The disparity between how clients feel about their marketing briefs and agencies feel was so drastic that you can't chalk it up to an artifact of perhaps a small. I didn't find the sample that small, but
There are only 200 responses from all of the United States.
that's fine. That's not a ton, but that's pretty statistically significant for a population that isn't that huge, right? Of people that write and receive briefs. So, I the disparity again to me is what's the really eye opening, where the clients think they're writing these great briefs, and the agencies are saying they're not great at all. And last resolution I would give is sign up for Howard's workshop if you're a brief writer, if you work at an in-house agency, if you are a client that writes briefs for your out-of-house agency, take Howard's workshop. It's going to improve your brief writing.
Thank you, Henry. I appreciate that. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too.
So, for today's creative review, rather than show some new creative and comment on it, I thought we'd go back to a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago about some creative from Heinz that I loved, and you said, I don't get it. And I thought this was more of Howard like being out of the loop and not recognizing a very noteworthy brand doing brilliant advertising. And the truth is, I posted on Facebook an image, one of the uh, out of home executions, and I said, "Do you recognize this brand?" Without looking it up, or can you tell me, true or false? Did you recognize the brand? And the only people that recognized the brand were people that were somehow connected with marketing or advertising. One of them is a professor. The other is somebody who works in advertising and communications. Pretty much every layperson um, did not know who the advertiser was. A lot of people guessed McDonald's, and I think that's a function of the red background. McDonald's has been using a red background for their out of home advertising for a while now. So this is the part where I say, I'm sorry, Howard, I was wrong. I was wrong. You were right. Um, What do you have to say about it?
Well, thank you for that. It's one of the things that I've thought about over the last many months of our recording these episodes was how infrequently we really disagreed. I mean, we have a couple of disagreements about some fundamental things, but we really agreed about mostly everything. And when we did disagree, they were not significant. But this one wasn't so much as a disagreement as that, like you said, you saw instantly what the objective of the creative was. This was Heinz making an assumption, and this is where I had the problem. They were making an assumption that the consumer understood or knew the product so well that it would see the label shape in these forms. There was a hamburger, there were French fries, and there was a hot dog and a bun, all made to look like the label on the Heinz bottle. So everybody who worked in advertising or marketing, and I have to stop and say not everybody, because when I posted this on my LinkedIn feed, it blew up my account. I've never had so many views and comments on anything. Of course, when you write about the creative brief, it's not exactly the the hottest topic out there, right? And we get that. We love the creative brief and we talk about it mostly because no one else is doing it. So when I posted this and I asked the question that you asked, do you know the brand? A lot of our guests who came on our show and other marketing and advertising folks, oh yeah, instantly, Heinz, got it, no problem. But then I said, well, what about lay people? Some of these same people then would say, well, I talked to my wife, I talked to my son, I talked to my daughter. They didn't get it. I just posted a blog post on and connected it to my LinkedIn account. I did a very informal, non-scientific survey at Kirby's Lane, which is a regular eatery that I go to with my family every Sunday morning here in Austin. And they got the scratching their heads. Look at this. They had no idea what the brand was. So advertising folks get it, consumers don't, and the disconnect is, it's called the curse of knowledge. This is a cognitive bias that says that once you learn something, once you acquire a piece of knowledge, it's very hard for you to assume or to believe that somebody else doesn't know what you know. You start to assume that they know what you know, and you make assumptions about that. And that's what I think this agency did. They made a mistake.
So I think it's a tough spot because we talk about the power of when you don't make the circle, right? When you leave the gap and let the consumer make the circle, how powerful that is. And that's what I thought was happening here. But obviously there wasn't enough of the circle there for people to recognize what the circle was. And I'm loath to say this, but perhaps they could have benefited from a little disaster check consumer research, to look at the work and say, are people rightfully attributing this to our brand? And if not, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the idea. I think you have to modify then the idea. And like, I'm not a creative, but in my mind, if it was a digital of out of home, you could imagine where you see the burger in that shape and then it morphs into the Heinz label, right? So to remove any doubt. Or maybe if it's not a digital out of home where it's like it's split in half, the burger and the label, and they both make the shape of the shield of the label. So I think that this could have benefited from a little bit of modification. Of course, it wouldn't have been as pretty for communication arts, right? But I definitely admit that I was wrong.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think the creatives, if they bothered to listen to our show and heard you offer up solutions, would be cringing, because every creative cringes when the marketer or the strategist starts to recommend creative, because, I could hear them saying, yeah, we thought about that and we didn't want to go down that path. But I still give them credit for taking the huge home run swing. You got to put yourself out there. You've got to take risks. Otherwise, why are we in this business? So
Yeah,
I tip my hat to them for that.
I mean, listen, it's not going to damage the brand in any way, right? Secondly, I think that for those people that did recognize it, and admittedly a small percentage, it might be a pretty powerful connection that you make with them. The other, there's a ton of things they could have done, and my suggestions aren't necessarily the only ones, but I think the point is to come back and say there's a real problem. people don't recognize this label. It's not as much of a distinctive asset as we think it is, and therefore we need to do more. And you could maybe introduce other ideas to get people familiar with that shape, and then a year down the road, do the burger and the fries and the hot dog, and people will get it. I just don't. Retrospectively, people weren't primed enough with the specific and unique shape of the Heinz shield or
Well,
Keystone.
we'll kind of keep an eye open for what's following up and see if there's anything that we can come back and report on it. But in the meantime, good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. Together we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye-bye.
Till next year. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.